Hare Krishna. Welcome to this Canto by Canto overview of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We will, in this series of talks, discuss the structure, the flow and the thread of the message, the thread of the development of thought and the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we will go over all the 12 cantos in a canto by canto overview. In this talk we will do an overview of the first canto. The first canto comprises of 19 chapters and it describes at three levels the origin of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So if we consider it, the Srimad Bhagavatam has two broad levels of conversationists. The first conversationists are Sutta Goswami and Shaunak and other sages at Naimisharanya. And then there is Shukadev Goswami talking with Parikshit Maharaj at Shukatal. So that conversation will actually begin in the second canto. So if you consider the first circle, that is Sutta Goswami and the sages of Naimisharanya, that's the first level conversation. So that will be talked about here. Right from the start of the first canto itself, and Sutta Goswami is the primary narrator of the first canto, and then apart from that there is the second level narration, the build up for the two characters, the background of the two characters of Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami will be described in this canto, and then how the two came to meet together to have a discussion that will be described in this canto, and thereafter the questions that Parikshit Maharaj asked, which start off the narration of the Bhagavatam, are described here, and Shukadev Goswami's answer starts in the second canto. So Shukadev Goswami significantly does not speak directly in this canto. So these are the two levels that are described. Third is, of course, in Vyasadev's compilation of Srimad Bhagavatam, how he compiled it after writing everything else and not feeling satisfied. That is described in the 4th, 5th, 6th chapters. So that is in his conceptualization, and then his rendering it in the literary form. That will be described also. So the mood of the first canto is that it is setting the scene for devotion in separation. The Srimad Bhagavatam attains its zenith in the 10th canto, and within the 10th canto also the Ras Panchadhyaya, chapters 29 to 33 are the climax, and within that the Gopi Gita, chapter 31, wherein when the gopis sing their song of separation from Krishna. That Viraha Bhakti is considered by many acharyas to be like the highest emotional ecstasy that is revealed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that mood of Viraha Bhakti is foreshadowed here in the first canto by talking about separation at various levels. So there are many separations that are talked about. Because there are many departures that happen in the first canto, and we'll see how this scene is set for separation in the first canto. Now the first chapter is called as questions by the sages. The first 3 verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1, 2 and 3 are broad invocation verses which give the theme of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam starts with a non-sectarian invocation of the absolute truth as Janmadhyasya Anvaiditartascharteshu abhigyasvarat. So it starts with that we are meditating Dhimahi, it ends. We are meditating on the absolute truth, and the definition of the absolute truth is given the same as what is given in the Vedanta Sutra. And this way the Bhagavatam establishes its connection with the Vedanta Sutra by indicating through having the similar start that it is going to address similar themes. So it does not say that it is going to talk about the glories of Krishna right here. It says from a non-sectarian point of view, from a universal's point of view, it says that we are going to meditate on the absolute truth. And there is of course the prayer Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which comes with it. So the first prayer invokes the absolute truth, first verse. The second verse talks about the glory of the Srimad Bhagavatam, how it gives the Vastava Vastu, how it can really gives the absolute truth and how it can release us from all misith, Tapatre Unmulanam, and to truly relish its import, we need to be non-envious. Paramo nirmatsaranam satam. And most importantly, what it says is Dharma Kaitava Projahita. This is a very dramatic statement of intent here. that it states that it is going to push aside, drive away all sub-religious principles and focus only on the principle of pure love, of pure devotion to the Supreme Lord. And then, so it starts with meditation on the absolute truth, then it says that it will focus on not just meditation but pure devotion on the absolute truth, and then it says in third verse that Pipita Bhagavata Rasamalayam, so that pure devotion, when we come to the personal manifestation of the absolute truth and relation pure devotion, that is something which is not just meditation now and reverence, that is positive relish that is there. So drink, O Rasika people. So in the third verse, the Bhagavatam reveals its link with the extensive and honored rasa tradition that has been there in India. And here the Bhagavatam states that it is going to give us rasa. And another very important point in this verse is Nigama Kalpataror, Kalitam Phalam. That this is, it brings its connection. So first let's talk about the connection with Vedanta. Vedanta is one of the schools of thought that is there. Now the Bhagavatam tells its connection with Veda. What is it? It is, if the Vedas are like a tree, the Bhagavatam is its fruit. In this way the Bhagavatam accepts the Vedic authority and also establishes its own position as the conclusion of the Vedic authority. And then after these three momentously important verses, then the scene shifts to Naimisharanya, where the sages are performing sacrifices and they ask questions. They ask questions to Sutta Goswami. Now Sutta Goswami is a great learned sage who is there in their assembly, who is just arrived, and then they all offer their respects to him and they ask him questions. And now if he sees questions, the questions that are asked to him are also very universal. It's not directly asking. It asks, there are so many scriptures, which is the essential scripture. There are so many dharma, which is the best dharma. What is it that will do the fullest, what is the greatest, the best good to all living beings? And in this way, the Bhagavatam focuses on questions of universal relevance. And of course, the sages have assembled at the advent of the age of Kali, and they are performing sacrifices for invoking auspiciousness of the age of Kali. But while they are performing fire sacrifices, they also realize that these fire sacrifices will not have as much potency, and so they ask, what is it that is the way that people can be delivered in Kali Yuga? And this conversation is happening soon after Krishna has departed. So they ask also that please tell us about the pastimes of Krishna, how he appeared, why he appeared. So I'm not going to get into technical analysis of the 6 questions here. Suffice it to say that these questions are what set off the discussion that Sutta Goswami launches into. And these questions are of universal relevance and importance. Now Sutta Goswami starts speaking from more or less the 2nd chapter, and he begins by offering obeisances to Shukadeva Goswami. And very beautiful glorification also. And normally, when one person appreciates another person, what about that other person is appreciating, that also tells us not only about that person but also about this person, about the appreciated and the appreciator, both we come to know. So Sutta Goswami says that how great is that Shukadeva Goswami, that he was so detached that he just left home without performing any rituals, and when his father called, his son did not answer at all. The only those who answered were the trees. And the trees echoed his call, and because they were also feeling separation from him. So he was Sarva Bhuta Hridayam. He was so dear to everyone. So that means he was so dear to everyone. He was so detached that he did not care for, he was not attached to his father, and that he had transcended the Vedic ritual. That's why Anupeta Peta Krityam. He went without performing any rituals. And then he talks about how that Shukadeva Goswami, for enlightening people, gave the torchlight of knowledge. Adhyatma Deepam, he gave this torchlight. And after describing this and offering obeisances to Narnarayan Rishi, so there is a set of verses where he offers obeisances, and then he gives in crux the answers from 6 to 22, 1.2.6 to 22. The 2nd chapter is entitled as Divinity and Divine Service by Srila Prabhupada. We will focus, in order to avoid too much technicality over here, we will stick to the titles that Srila Prabhupada has used for the Bhagavatam. Later on, when we study the 1st canto and all the Bhagavatam in detail, we will look at other titles whenever it's appropriate. So Divinity and Divine Service is the title, and the focus is that it reveals divine service means devotional service. Divinity is the absolute truth Krishna, but in his multiple manifestations are also talked about here. So 6 to 22 are very important verses which are among the most quoted verses in the Bhagavatam by Srila Prabhupada and by the previous acharyas also, because they give both the conclusion of the Bhagavatam and the process of the Bhagavatam. So the conclusion of the Bhagavatam is, it begins with Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo. What is the Paradharma? That is, which is by which bhakti is performed to the Supreme Lord. And then in this analysis, first how, if there is Parabhakti, then the other paths will automatically come, it is told. That Jnana and Vairagya will come. If the Parabhakti is there, then that is the perfection of doing Varnashram Dharma also. And on the other hand, if Bhakti is not there, then it all becomes Shrama Eva Hi Kevalam. And then, after talking about the glory of Bhakti, then this discussion moves to the object of Bhakti. And that, it said that the object has multiple manifestations, Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagwan. And this discussion focuses on the Bhagwan manifestation. And Bhagwan can be approached through those who are devoted to him. And that's why we hear from them and we serve them. And then the process by which we become purified by hearing, through hearing is described. How Tadarajastamo Bhava Kamalobha Deshe, how the anarthas from the heart go away progressively by the practice of bhakti, and how Sukham Sattve Prasidati, we become happy in bhakti. Vidyate Hridaya Granthes Chidyante Sarva Samshaya Kshiyante Chasya Karmani Drishte Vatmanishware. That in this way all doubts go away, the knots of karma stop, the desires, and we are able to become self-realized, we are able to become God-realized. So after describing this process of bhakti, what was going to happen is, what Sutta Goswami is describing here, that is what the Bhagavatam will use opportunity to do. Bhagavatam uses the opportunity to hear and in this way become purified. So what is being told theoretically, the Bhagavatam will give us the opportunity to experience practically by giving us so much substance to hear about Krishna. And then it goes on to talk about, this second chapter goes on to talk about various various kinds of worshipable lords. And there are tamasic, there are the deities that are worshipped by tamasic people, rajasic people, and the sattvic. And how the sattvic is the highest, the ghora rupa, the terrible forms are not worshipped by those who seek transcendence. So in one sense, the Bhagavan is focused more clearly through various metaphors in the second chapter of the Bhagavatam. And then after thus focusing on Bhagavan, and the third chapter gives us a brief synopsis of the various incarnations that are going to be dealt with further in the Bhagavatam. Not all of them, but many of them. So there is a list of incarnation that comes in 1.3, that is first canto, third chapter. Then another list of incarnation which comes in 2.6, second canto, sixth chapter. And then these incarnations are progressively described in the various cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. So now in this list of incarnations, which is described in the third chapter, the significant point of that is conveyed by Srila Prabhupada through his title also. That is, Krishna is the source of all incarnations. So therein, essentially, the point that is made is that the Bhagavatam is a book focusing not just on Bhagavan, but Bhagavan in his very sweet and intimate manifestation of Krishna. And we'll see that among the 335 chapters of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 90 chapters are devoted to Krishna in the third canto, in the 10th canto. And actually, many of the chapters, almost all the chapters in the 11th canto, the 30 odd chapters that are there in the 11th canto are also devoted to Krishna. Some of them are devoted to his pastimes, and much of it is devoted to Krishna's instructions which he gives in Uddhava Gita. So in that sense, directly over 120 chapters out of 335 are devoted to Krishna. So even in terms of number of chapters, it's more than 1/3. And in terms of overall number of verses also, the pastimes of Krishna occupy 1/3 or more of the Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam not only declares that Krishna is the source of all incarnations, Ete Chamsha Kala Pumsa, Krishnasta Bhagavan Swayam. Indrari Vyakulam Lokam Hridayanti Yuge Yuge. So all these incarnations are the source, they are manifest Amsha or Etechi Amsha Kalaha Pumsa. They are Amsha or Kalamsha or Kalaha. They are parts of parts of parts, but Krishna is the source of all of them. And in this particular verse, the Bhagavatam reveals its focus on the manifestation of Krishna, who will be revealed much more in detail. Now, the Bhagavatam in this way reverses what is considered to be the hierarchy by people, that Vishnu has 10 incarnations, one of them is Krishna. But that is only from the point of view of those who consider God as the universal administrator who comes down in response to calls for help. But then so that means there is this world and there is God as the administrator. So when we call to God, God comes into this world. But beyond this, God has his own abode, and his abode is not just a place where he is the administrator, where he reciprocates intimately. And among those abodes, the abode of Krishna is the highest, where the greatest intimacy is there. So the Bhagavatam expands the framework, and then it reveals that while it is not wrong to say that Krishna comes from Vishnu, that in the sense that when we pray to Vishnu, when the Devatas pray to Vishnu, one of the incarnations that comes is Krishna. But a more complete truth is that beyond that there is a spiritual world, and there the incarnations exist eternally, and therein Krishna is the most intimate manifestation of the absolute truth, and he is the source of all manifestations. So the Bhagavatam doesn't directly contradict, but it expands the scope thereby revealing how Krishna is the source of all incarnations. And there are many incarnations described in this, and briefly the pastimes of these incarnations are described, and the thrust again of the Bhagavatam in this canto is to reveal, in this chapter, is to reveal how Ishvara has so many manifestations. One of the significant verses there is that there are as many incarnations as there are waves in an ocean. So now the number of waves in the ocean is innumerable. So there are innumerable incarnations. Why are there infinite incarnations? Because Krishna's love for us is infinite. And that's why he comes again and again. Sambhavami yuge yuge. He comes again and again to give us opportunity is to be delivered. And of course in the second and third chapters, while talking about incarnation, it's also talked about how the Supreme Lord manifests in this world and maintains this world through the Purusha avatars. So the Sankhya analysis, wherein the concept of Purusha is introduced, is extensively explored. That is introduced in the Bhagavatam also, and this will also come repeatedly, and especially in the third canto. Now chapters 4, 5 and 6 are the Narada Vyasa Samvad. So till now what all has happened in the Bhagavatam? The Bhagavatam is established that Bhakti is the highest, and Bhagwan is Bhakti is the highest sadhana, and Bhagwan is the highest was mentioned in that second chapter, but the various manifestations of Bhagwan, and among them the highest is Krishna, is established in the third chapter. Then it is described that what Sutta Goswami is going to recite, how has this been composed? So this Bhagavatam, how is it composed? So now he goes to a setting where Vyasadeva is in deep meditation and in some state of dissatisfaction. He has written a huge library of books practically. He has written he's put into written form the Veda and divided into 4 groups so that it will be accessible, manageable, entrusted it to his trustworthy disciples. And he has written even the Mahabharata, he has written the Purana, 18 Purana, but still he is not satisfied. And he is thinking, why am I not satisfied? And he himself thinks, the Vyasadeva is also a learned person. And he thinks and he realizes that actually I have not glorified the Supreme Lord properly. And herein the Bhagavatam reveals, again, it demonstrates through Vyasadeva's example what was told in 1.2.6, that Yayatma Suprasidati. What will satisfy the heart? That when there is ahaitukya bhaktihata bhakti, only that will satisfy the heart, nothing else will satisfy. So the Bhagavatam illustrates that over here by stating that Vyasadeva is not satisfied, although he has written so much, he is not satisfied. But then it will reveal that when Vyasadeva does this, he glorifies the Supreme Lord. Ahituke Prati Bhagavata Bhakti, or as in this chapter the Bhagavatam calls it, Yasho Bhagavata Amala, the spotless glory of the Lord. When he demonstrates, when he glorifies and he disseminates, then he becomes suprasidati, he becomes joyful. And here, just as Vyasadeva looks within and then he looks up. He looks within and he gets an answer, and he looks up and he sees his spiritual master, Narad Muni, is there. And Narad Muni reiterates what Vyasadeva has inferred, and there's a two-way vindication or reiteration of the message from within and from without. He gets the same message, that you have to glorify the Supreme Lord purely. And now, now what is the glory of bhakti and what is the glory of how that glory manifests in the life of sadhaka, that Narad Muni tells. So first Narad Muni gives instructions about how bhakti is so potent that even if a person is not qualified properly, that person glorifies. And even if that glorification is faulty in the technical sense, but in the devotional sense it is filled with potency. So on the other hand, if somebody writes very poetically but is not glorifying the Lord, that is useless. So again, the point is bhakti is what gives value to everything. And everything valuable should be used for glorifying the Supreme Lord, for the purpose of bhakti. Idam pumsa purushat siddhas suktas idam pumsas tapasah shutasya. That what the words that Prabhupada quoted for telling us that even science can be used to glorify the Supreme Lord. So the point is, all branches of knowledge should be used to glorify Krishna for the sake of bhakti. After talking about this, in the next verse, the Bhagavatam moves on and talks about how, in the next chapter, so here the process of bhakti is described, and how even if from various different angles bhakti is glorified, how it brings value to everything, and how in the path of bhakti there is no failure. Even if somebody falls, that person will still have taste and will continue on and attain success. On the other hand, even if another path somebody attains success, that success ultimately turns to be futile. So through multiple angles, Narad Muni glorifies bhakti and drives home that message to Vyasadeva that therefore you should glorify bhakti. And you should glorify the object of bhakti, that is Bhagavan. And then in the 6th chapter, through the 5th chapter onwards, and in 6th chapter, Narad Muni tells his own story. So it is one thing to theoretically glorify something, but it's quite another. It has a huge, far greater level of conviction when that is demonstrated practically. So after saying that bhakti can purify everyone, Narad Muni demonstrates that by telling his own story. And he tells about how he was a maidservant's son in an earlier life. And maidservant's son means there is no mention of his father. So at one level we could say it is a very impure birth. But even in that, what has been told in 1.2, that if one serves the Bhagavatas, hears from them, then one will become purified, whatever level one may be at. That's what is demonstrated. So Narad Muni, by serving these sages, taking their prasad and hearing from them, he gets such a transcendental taste. And here again something is foreshadowed, that how to deal with death by absorption in the Lord beyond death. So Narad Muni, Narada, as the boy at that time, he faces the death of his mother. And how does he deal with it? Rather than just grieving over his mother was the only person he had, he was now an orphan boy. But rather than seeing that as a devastating loss, he sees this as a liberating opportunity. Now there are no distractions, now let me just focus on the Supreme Lord. And in this way, how the Bhagavatam can convert adversity in opportunity is demonstrated. How Narad Muni does that, and how the Bhagavatam will enable Parikshit Maharaj also to do that in dealing with the devastating curse that he gets. That is foreshadowed here in the Bhagavatam. And similarly, whatever devastations, reversals, adversities we face in our life, we can also tolerate and transcend them by absorbing ourselves in the Bhagavatam. So Narad Muni tells his own story, and he says how he went towards the north and performed austerity, and he got a sight of the Lord, and then the Lord disappeared. When the Lord disappeared, he felt intense separation from him. And what was the Lord's message? He couldn't see him, but he heard a voice saying that this craving for me will purify you, and you will see me in a future birth. And so here again, there is Viraha Bhakti. There is one glimpse and there is no longer any glimpse. But that Viraha Bhakti has such potency that it purifies Narada. And then actually Narada dies. But death is just a transition to a far greater destination. And what happens? Narada becomes the great sage Narad Muni, who is transcendentally liberated, able to go anywhere and everywhere, simply absorbed in glorifying the Lord. Narad Muni's liberated state is not just physical, that he can just by desiring, like a transcendental cosmonaut, go to whichever part of the universe he wants, but it is also emotional and spiritual. That wherever he goes, he doesn't get entangled because he is absorbed in glorifying the Supreme Lord. And that state he has attained by the magical potency of bhakti. After telling this thrilling narrative for a disciple to hear directly from the person of the spiritual master how I came to Bhakti Krishna consciousness, that is so enlivening. But this is even such a dramatic narrative. And then Narad Muni again reiterates the same message too. Therefore, now meditate, anusmaran, meditate and understand what is the absolute truth, and then put it in words. Glorify that absolute truth by which people will be benefited, people will be purified, people will be elevated and liberated. And this, saying this, the Narad Muni departs. This is where 6th chapter more or less ends. In the 7th chapter, it is titled by Prabhupada, Son of Drona Punished. So here the first verses are very important in his Bhagavad Sandarbha. The first few verses, and Narad Muni, Jiva Goswami describes how the vision that Vyasadeva has is what defines what he will, what the Bhagavatam's essential message will be. So Vyasadeva, after hearing the exhortation of Narad Muni, sits down in meditation and anusmara, samadhina anusmara, he actually does that. And then what does he see? He sees the Supreme Lord, Pashat Purusham Purna, Mayam Chidatapashrim. So, again, I am not quoting many verses in this because I don't want to make this class very long. Just quote the relevant fragments from those verses. So, he sees the Supreme Lord, he sees Maya under his control, and he sees the Jiva under Maya. And he sees that if this Jiva can be connected with Bhagavan, through the Bhagavad Katha, through the Bhagavat, then the Jiva will come out of the clutches of Maya and will attain auspiciousness. So Maya, which is acting as a blocking wall between the Jiva and the Lord, and it's keeping the Jiva under illusion, that Maya can be removed, that wall can be broken through by the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's Anarthopasamam Sakshat, that for removing all arthas, that Bhagavatam will be composed. And then what happens? He starts meditating. So at this point, the essence of the Bhagavatam, the essential message is that there are three entities. There is the Lord, there is Maya, and there is Jiva. And the Jiva can come out of Maya by taking shelter of the Bhagavatam. And actually this is the essence of the philosophy. By taking shelter of Bhagavan through Bhagavad Katha, through Bhagavad Shravana Kirtan. This is the essence of all philosophy. And is told in the 4 verses, and this is what the Bhagavatam will further expand upon. And now the Bhagavatam moves forward, and it starts the scene with the son of Drona punished. So now, why does the Bhagavatam start from here? It's like the Bhagavatam is remembering the Mahabharata. In one sense, the Mahabharata has happened, and the events after the traumatic, catastrophic war of Kurukshetra has happened, Bhagavatam takes off from there. The point of the Bhagavatam is that it is setting the scene for the meeting of its two conversationists, that is Shukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. So Shukadeva Goswami is described very briefly, where it is said that Atma Rama Shmunayo Nirgrantha Apyurukrame. So his whole story is not told over here, But it is simply mentioned. So Sutta, now here the narrative goes back. Sutta Goswami has told this, that Narad Vyasa Samvad he has told. He has told about Vyasa's meditation. And then the Bhagavatam moves forward to, okay, this is the essential message that is going to be revealed, and it is going to be revealed through the conversation between these two people, Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami. So then he starts introducing Shukadeva Goswami. And when he introduces Shukadeva Goswami, he says that how he was already renounced and liberated, Atma Ramashchamayo, without any attachments, but still he studied the Srimad Bhagavatam. Why did he study the Srimad Bhagavatam? That is so that he could, so the sages ask, why did he take up such a formidable work to study? He said, because that is transcendental and that brings such great taste. So here the post-liberated status of the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam is talked about. It's established through the post-liberated attraction of Shukadeva Goswami to Srimad Bhagavatam. So here there is a very strong refutation of Maya impersonalism, that Shukadeva Goswami, although he was liberated, he was attracted towards the Bhagavatam. That means Bhagavatam is a post-liberation attraction. Most attractions in this world are pre-liberation. In fact, they stop us from moving towards liberation. But the Bhagavatam is the post-liberation attraction of liberated souls. So that is established through this very short description of how Shukadeva Goswami studied the Srimad Bhagavatam and mastered it. That story is of course told elaborately elsewhere about how he was going out into he just left home and renounced, but he heard a woodcutter speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam and he was so captivated by it. He asked him, where did you hear it? He said, oh, I heard it from your father. Oh, my father. Then he went back to his father and he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from him and he became a Bhagavat. He became a Mahabhagavat who would eventually speak the full Bhagavat to Parikshit Maharaj. Then after that, now the setting starts for the story of Parikshit Maharaj. So one conversation is how he became fit for speaking the conversation, that is told very briefly. And now the next part will be how the other conversationist, that is Parikshit Maharaj, how he came to a position where he became in urgent need of hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. That will be talked about in the second part now. So here from chapter 7, just the stage before Parikshit Maharaj's birth is described, that Ashwatthama, he tries to kill the child in the womb of Uttara, and this way he tries to kill the only descendant, the heir of the Pandavas, and he wants to end that dynasty, because he feels it was this dynasty that killed my father, it was this dynasty that caused the defeat of our side. I want to take revenge and kill. So the protective potency of Krishna, how Krishna comes, intervenes and protects, that is described. Now of course the Bhagavatam starts off with slightly before that, how Ashwatthama has killed all the warriors at night in Sauptik Parva, and then Krishna and Arjuna are in pursuit. That's where Krishna enters for the first time in the Bhagavatam as a charioteer of Arjuna, as a servant. That Bhakta Vatsalya of Krishna is demonstrated right in the first scene, in his first entry in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he guides Arjuna. When the Brahmastra starts coming, Arjuna asks, well, how has this come? And Krishna explains over here. And when he explains, then after that, he uses Brahmastra to counter. And they think that Brahmastra has been countered and both the Brahmastra has been removed, but Ashwatthama redirects his Brahmastra to try to kill Uttara's womb, the child in Uttara's womb. And Krishna, realizing that although Krishna is on the chariot, Krishna comes and in the womb of Uttara prays to Krishna. So there is actually almost a similar prayer. Arjuna prays to Krishna, please guide me. And Uttara prays to Krishna, please save me. And Krishna, Uttara is actually in a safe chamber, woman chamber, but suddenly she feels a great danger and she begs, please protect the child in my womb. And Krishna comes and fights that. Brahmastra was unstoppable, but Krishna sends it back, defeats it. And the embryo in the child sees, oh, I was about to die, and who is this effulgent, transcendental person who came and saved me? I want to know who it is. And his name becomes, the child who is eventually born will be named Parikshit. Why? Because he's always doing parikshan of everyone. Ikshan, seeing everyone to find out, oh, is this the person whom I had met? Is this the person whom I had met? Is this the person whom I had met? Whom I had seen in the, not exactly met because there was no conversation directly, whom I had seen. So he wants to know, and in this way he is always examining. So again, the same mood of viraha is there. Parikshit, he doesn't have darshan of the Lord ever again. He has darshan only in the womb, because by the time he grows up, Krishna has already departed from the world. In fact, actually Krishna, the point is that Parikshit never gets to meet Krishna. Although Parikshit never gets to meet Krishna directly, the point is that he has that memory of Krishna forever ingrained within him, and that is what he cherishes and relishes. And actually, now the scene moves onwards. Parikshit is not yet born. So then what happens? Here, after Krishna has saved both Arjuna and then Uttara's child, Parikshit from the Brahmastra, Arjuna by giving guidance, and Parikshit by personally intervening. Then there's the revisiting. He returns and he says, now the danger is off, let me depart to Dwarka. And Kunti prays, please, O Krishna, don't depart. And again, these are also prayers of devotion in separation. And these are prayers of extraordinary devotion, where Kunti prays that, my dear Lord, if calamities can bring out union with you, then let calamities come. Nobody in this world wants calamities. But he says that which people want to avoid, vipadah santutah saswat, I want them again and again if that brings us in contact with you. And her mood is, she doesn't want separation, but at the same time she doesn't want our other relatives and the other devotees of Krishna and Dwarka to be separated. So therefore he says, my dear Lord, whether I am separated from you or whether I am united with you, let my consciousness always flow towards you. Tvai me ananya vishaya matir madhopate sakrit. Ratimudvata adadha gange vaugamudhanvati. Let my consciousness always flow towards you, my Lord. With this prayer, and then offering obeisances. Sri Krishna Sakha. She offers obeisances and she ends her prayer. And Krishna just smiles and does not respond in any way to her prayers. But the offering of prayers, Krishna accepts. And that is enough for Kunti Maharani. And then Yudhishthira requests, please stay on for some time. And Krishna agrees to stay on. He cannot refuse Yudhishthira's sincere request. And he knows that Yudhishthira is still mortified by the enormous bloodshed and loss of life that happened in the Kurukshetra war. And Krishna has a further plan to glorify his devotee. So then, seeing that Yudhishthira is still very grief-struck, Krishna himself instructs. Vyasadeva instructs. All the great sages instruct, but nobody is able to pacify Yudhishthira. And therefore, Krishna says, let us go to Bhishma and hear from Bhishma. And here, Krishna stays on so that the glory of Bhishma Pitamaha is revealed to the whole world. So the 8th chapter was the prayers of Kunti. But all these events also happen in the 8th chapter. And the 9th chapter is then the Bhishma's departure. And in Bhishma's departure, there are many valuable motives that come up. One, the most important is how Bhishma Dev gives elaborate instructions. The instructions go on for days and days and days. And finally, when the Uttarayan, the auspicious time comes for him to depart, then he fixes his consciousness on Krishna and offers beautiful prayers. Tribhunakamanam tamala varanam. That very beautiful, my dear Lord, you are the most attractive form in the all the 3 worlds. Vijaya sakhe ratirastumena vadya. And the vision of devotion that Bhishma Pitamaha has is incredible. Normally most people would think of God as coming, I am suffering and God will come to deliver me from suffering. But the vision of devotion that Bhishma Pitamaha has is of God coming to kill him. He says, I want to remember you in the form when you lifted a chariot wheel and charged towards me. When your hair was scattered, when there was sweat and blood droplets from your forehead, and you charged towards me. Bhagavati ratirastume mumurshor. let my rati be unto this form of the Lord. And I did more sure, I desire to die thinking of this form of the Lord, my Lord. And after offering choice prayers, Bhishmadev departs from the world. And here, two things, Bhishmadev's glory, firstly in pacifying Yudhishthir, because he gives various instructions to Yudhishthir on various levels of dharma, and finally he focuses on pure devotion. And one of the important things that he tells Yudhishthir over there in that section is also that ultimately the Lord's plan is inconceivable. If you just stick to his plan, there will be auspiciousness for you. And he demonstrated that through his own life, wherein in his own life what did he do? He said that actually I stuck to the devotion of the Lord, and what is the result? Now he's right here to give his mercy to me. Similarly, you stick to his plan also. Don't try to analyze his plan, just surrender to it. And this is what Yudhishthir accepts, and Yudhishthir becomes pacified by this. And then thereafter, the next thing that happens is that Yudhishthir moves on. And when Yudhishthir moves, Krishna, so the 9th chapter is this, that Yudhishthir is pacified, Bhishma departs. And then there is just a quick mention of the events that are going to happen, that Yudhishthir Maharaj is going to perform Ashwamedha Yajna, that is in a prelude mentioned over here. But then the essential, the 10 chapters, the 10th and 11th chapters are Krishna departs for Yudhishthir Dwarka, and Krishna arrives in Dwarka. And herein the essential message is of, again, separation and union. So when Krishna departs from Hastinapur to go to, from the Pandavas' kingdom, Hastinapur and Dharvastha, to go to Dwarka, the Pandavas are in great separation, and yet they fondly and reverentially let Krishna depart. And then after that, when he arrives in Dwarka, the devotees there are so delighted to meet him. They are overwhelmed with joy, and very poetic descriptions. First, there in the 10th chapter, there are poetic descriptions of the ladies in the Pandavas' kingdom, how they glorify Krishna, how wonderful he is. Their choice prayers of exalted realization and devotion. And then when the queens of Krishna and other residents of Krishna, when they hear Krishna's conch, and they're jubilant, it is as if their dead have come back to life, and they run out to greet Krishna. The queens send their children to run out, and as Krishna hugs the children, and the queens feel Krishna's embrace of them, and they feel gratified, they feel satisfied, they feel pacified. So these are very emotionally moving descriptions which depict love in separation and depict love in union. And in this way, they move on. So then the 12th chapter marks the birth of Emperor Parikshit. So the previous chapters from 7 to 11 are events which describe are describing events that happened related to him but prior to his birth. The threat to his life and how he was rescued, and other events that happened. It's building up towards Parikshit's birth. And there is profuse glorification of Parikshit by the astrologers, who declare how he's like like so many great personalities who have been on the universe earlier. And by those profuse comparisons, the glory of Parikshit is demonstrated in extraordinary ways. And incidentally, that Parikshit will die because of a curse is mentioned also at that time. But Yudhishthir Maharaj is not very worried about that. Because as he sees that as long as he's going to live wonderfully, that is more than enough. That's what is needed. He's going to live a life of dharma, a life of bhakti. He's going to be an exemplary king. That is there how he die. After that, if he's going to die, his eventual destination is assured. Yudhishthir Maharaj also here demonstrates a fearlessness about death, which is characteristic of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and a similar fearlessness will be demonstrated by Parikshit Maharaj also, by absorbing himself in the Bhagavatam. And then, after this description of the glories of Parikshit Maharaj, then the events move forward. The 13th chapter describes how Dhritarashtra quits home. And again in this chapter, the cutting instructions of Vidura, which bring about detachment in Dhritarashtra's heart, are the emphasis, and how Dhritarashtra becomes disentangled by those instructions. So there are two aspects, for one is to become detached from the material, and second is to become attached to the spiritual, and both happen by hearing from the Bhagavat. So now Dhritarashtra is exactly a devotee, and because he's not exactly a devotee, and at that particular point he is not in a position where he can appreciate Krishna's glories. So what Vidura focuses on is detachment from the material, and is cutting instructions to achieve that purpose. And then Dhritarashtra achieves a state of elevated destination that he would not have achieved without Vidura's instructions. So the Bhagavat's capacity to Vidura is also Bhagavat, and his capacity to give an appropriate message for elevating people is demonstrated. And then basically the storyline is moving towards how Parikshit Maharaj will become ready for hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. The 14th chapter is actually describing it's entitled The Disappearance of Lord Krishna, but essentially there is primarily description of the ill omens that affect that are seen by Yudhishthira, and which he describes to Bhima. And there are very, very scary descriptions over there of how the whole existence, nature and earth and everything seems to be in a state of gloom and doom, and that actually foreshadows there is going to be gloom and down at the material level inevitably, but if at the spiritual level one takes shelter of the Lord, then it all can be transcended. So that gloom and doom, it is very vividly described in the 14th chapter, and that even Yudhishthira, after describing this to Bhima, significantly Bhima doesn't speak one word over here. Although Bhima is such a powerful warrior over there in the Kurukshetra war, unstoppable practically, but when destiny is playing its own way, when the Supreme Lord is withdrawing, even he can do nothing except just hear. Even he with his formidable power cannot avert the will of the Supreme Lord, which is going to manifest through his disappearance. So then, as the next chapter starts, it is Arjuna who appears. In fact, Arjuna has appeared in the previous chapter, but he starts speaking in this chapter. Arjuna is in a completely disconsolate condition, and Yudhishthira is alarmed to see this condition, and he asks, what has got you to this condition? He speculates on various reasons, and finally he thinks, is it because Krishna has departed? And his voice falls, his voice chokes, and he thinks, how is it possible? Is it really happened? And Arjuna tells, this is what has actually happened. That Supreme Lord, who was my friend, has now departed. That Lord who had benedicted you, by whose arrangement you had been able to perform the sacrifice, Rajaswi sacrifice, he has departed. That Lord who arranged for Bhima to defeat Jarasandha, he has been defeated. That Lord who arranged for me to go to heavens and defeat even Shiva, satisfy Shiva by my fighting skills, that Lord has departed. That Lord who enabled me to satisfy Indra by my heroic powers, defeat the enemies of Indra whom Indra could not defeat, that Lord, he has departed. That Lord who enabled me to survive and succeed in the Kurukshetra war against hundreds and thousands of warriors, that Lord has departed. And he says, that Lord who used to affectionately joke with me, sit with me, and have intimate talks with me, that Lord has departed. What is the point of my life without him? Because I am overwhelmed with misery. And this is the intense feeling of separation that Arjuna is experiencing. And within that separation, there is immense absorption and there is upsurge of agonized yet ecstatic devotion. And it culminates in Arjuna remembering the instructions of the Gita, remembering to remember Krishna and to seek shelter in the remembrance of Krishna, and thereby transcend the misery. So there can be material miseries which hearing about Krishna and remembering him can help us to transcend, and there can be spiritual miseries of separation from Krishna. That also hearing about Krishna can enable us to transcend. And Arjuna demonstrates that by taking shelter of Krishna in a very deep way. And then this chapter is titled The Pandavas Depart Timely. And essentially the Pandavas leave knowing that Krishna has departed. They also renounce the world and they also attain perfection. So they don't want to stay in this world where Krishna is no longer there. So Parikshit has grown adequately and Parikshit is entrusted as the king. And Parikshit becomes the king, and then the next chapter describes the heroic way in which Parikshit deals with Kali. So it starts with the setting of a bull and a cow talking. That's this 16th chapter is how Parikshit received the age of Kali. And then it is Parikshit's punishment of the age of Kali and how Parikshit was cursed. That's all described in the next chapter. That's how the Bhagavatam moves onwards towards its climax, towards the setting of the scene where the conversation between Shukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj will begin. Now here, in this conversation again, various values that are sacred that are talked about in the conversation between the cow, who is actually Mother Earth, Bhumi, and the bull, who is Dharma. And they are talking all this while this wicked person impersonating as a Kshatriya is actually tormenting the cow, tormenting the bull. And Parikshit hears all this and he springs into action. And now, normally we would think that a hero means that person has to fight and overpower the villain, the enemy, and then his heroism is demonstrated. But Parikshit is so glorious that his enemy surrenders without a fight. He says that, no, I am no match to you. I am no match to you. So rather than trying to fight, he just surrenders and he says, please give me shelter. I have surrendered to you. And Parikshit, recognizing that it's Kshatriya principle to give shelter, he gives shelter. And he is also Saharagrahi. He sees that in Kali Yuga, when Kali's influence is going to come, but in Kali Yuga, that even if somebody desires to do good, that good will have effect. Therefore, he agrees to give shelter to Parikshit, to Kali. So it's actually his capacity to subdue Kali is itself a greatly heroic feat that Parikshit performs. And Parikshit rules heroically, and the way Kali will infiltrate will be through the act of a rash Brahmin son. And that will be described in the next chapters. So then what happens? Parikshit, after he subdued Kali and restrained him, then in the next chapter Parikshit goes once for hunting and then he's exhausted, he's thirsty, and he comes to the hermitage of Shamik Rishi where he asks for water, but the Rishi is absorbed in meditation and therefore he does not respond. And Parikshit is so tired that he feels that is this sage actually pretending to be absorbed in trance? That's why he's neglecting me. And he feels that you are disrespecting me, therefore I will disrespect you. You did not show me any courtesy, so at least I will follow the courtesy and I will offer you a garland. But in a garland, because you did not show me courtesy, so it's a sarcastic reciprocation where he says that I will offer you a garland of a dead snake. Now sometimes this is all a part of the transcendental arrangement of the Lord for the Bhagavatam manifested in the world. So then when this happens, the Rishi's son, Shringi, he's a boy, but he has Brahminical powers. When he sees he arrogates to himself the position of Krishna. He says Krishna has gone now and therefore there is no one to correct adharma. And what is this great adharma? That a Kshatriya who is meant to be like a dog guarding the house. He says that we Brahmanas are actually the lords of the house and the Kshatriyas are like dogs. Kshatriyas are the guardians of society, they have to be very respected. But he treats them like dogs, and he says that this dog, if a dog comes to the house and dog is not given water, who allows the dog to come into the inner parts of the house? So like that, my father did not give him water. So what's wrong in that? So he has done Maryada Vitikraman and he is to punish, and he curses him and he will die in 7 days. And as Parikshit Maharaj is going back, so he thinks, why did I do such a thing? Maybe that sage was actually absorbed in meditation, and that's why he did not hear me. I should not have done like this. And he himself prays, my dear Lord, for my sin, whatever atonement is there, whatever punishment is there, let the punishment come upon me, so that I will never again fall to this mentality of offending the Brahmanas. And meanwhile, the Shringi goes and starts crying in front of his father and told what has happened. The Shamik feels so remorseful, he chastises his child. Why did you do such an impetuous thing? Who will protect the world? Who will stop Kali? Now this king is gone. And this king goes away. But he quickly sends a message to the king. And when Parikshit hears this, he sees this as an opportunity to disentangle himself from the world. Doesn't see it as an injustice, as a disproportionately vindictive reaction for a small infraction. He sees this as an opportunity. And he, when trusting the kingdom immediately to his son and successor, Janmejay, he departs. He departs to the forest and he comes to the banks of the Ganga and he sits among the sages. Determined, he says that I have decided to fast, taken a vow to fast, and I have decided that I just want to, he himself feels that the best thing to do would be for him to hear Harikatha and he asks them to speak Harikatha. But then he says that this is what I think, but you please, you are all great sages. And knowing that Parikshit's departure, Parikshit is a great king and his departure is going to be a great event. Sages from all over the world come, all over the universe practically come there. And actually similarly sages had come earlier when Bhishma was about to depart. And again they assemble over here. And as they are discussing, he asks, what is the duty of a person about to die? As all the sages start contemplating, and they all have different thoughts of what might be the best thing to do. So at that time, Shukdev comes over there. And Shukdev is a young lad and he is actually he's so indifferent to the world that he's just covered with the directions. And people not understanding, the ordinary people, the children and others not understanding his exalted position, they're thinking, what is this madman walking around with unclothed like this? And they're teasing him and they're making fun of him. But Shukdev is Swami is completely transcendental to it. But when he comes in with his effulgent form, all the people in the assembly get up. And they know, because they know how exalted he is. And then the children and the women and all, they all are sitting back, oh, we're taunting this person, but all these great sages are respecting this person. What have we done? Just flee from there. Thinking we should not have offended. This sage should not curse us. Let us get out of his sight before he curses us. Now Shukdev Goswami is so transcendent, he has no intention of cursing anyone. And then Parikshit Maharaj offers his respect, offers obeisances to Shukdev Goswami. And he says, it is my great fortune that you have come here to bless me at this time of death. Surely it is because my ancestors, the Pandavas, are such great devotee that Krishna has arranged for you to come. Otherwise, you hardly ever come to householders like us. You are so renounced that you don't even stay at a householder's place for any time longer than the time required to milk a cow. But you have come now, please tell me, what is my duty? What is the duty of a person in general? What is the duty of a person about to die? I beg you for this answer. So at this point, the Srimad Bhagavatam first canto ends. So the intense devotional mood of Parikshit Maharaj's urgent inquiry is what is the last note that the Srimad Bhagavatam first canto gives us. And that urgent need to hear about the Lord, if we can get that, then the Bhagavatam's blessings will shower down upon us and our heart will be open to relish that blessings, to be benefited by those blessings, to be uplifted and liberated by those blessings. So how the Bhagavatam unfolds further, we'll discuss in our next talks.